Every year, some product ends up taking the top spot in terms of the number of questions people ask about it. One year it was oatmeal pancakes, another year it was cottage cheese, then something else. So this year it turns out it's eggs. Again, the big question, should you eat eggs or not? Is it better to have eggs in your diet or not have them at all? Well, I mean, in your diet, of course. How many eggs can you eat? Which eggs are bigger, which are smaller, which are better, which are worse? It's a tough question. So let's finally figure it out. Should we eat them or not? For example, I have a friend who eats 24 eggs a week because he works out, but he says they affect cholesterol, so he eats 12 with yolks and the other dozen without yolks. Another friend of mine doesn't eat eggs at all and says, well, I just don't really like the taste. Maybe I'll have 1 or 2 a week and that's it. So is it healthy or harmful? Are there maybe any studies on this topic? Let's figure it out. So is it a superfood or a hidden threat? And it turns out it all depends on the context. For example, for women after menopause, eggs can actually become a factor that contributes to unwanted weight gain, especially when combined with a typical Western diet. And this is a vivid example of how a seemingly universally healthy food, depending on the conditions we put it in and the diet it's part of, can have both beneficial and harmful effects. And just recently, a study was published showing that, for example, in women who have already gone through menopause, higher egg consumption is associated with weight gain. Who would have thought? You wouldn't think eggs and excess weight go together. After all, it's protein. How did that contribute to weight gain? It turns out that the key factor that makes eggs either healthier or, on the contrary, harmful is the type of diet. And the highest risk is among those who follow a Western-style diet, which includes a lot of processed meats, refined grains, sweets, and fast food. And in that context, it turns out eggs can actually be harmful. But without that, they can be beneficial. Why is this important? Because basically, this completely changes our understanding of diet and actually shifts the whole nutritional narrative. The narrative because for decades, eggs were demonized for containing cholesterol. And then there was a kind of reevaluation and they were rehabilitated as a superfood. And now we look at them through the lens of metabolic context. For example, after menopause, estrogen levels drop, and estrogen used to play a protective role in fat metabolism and protected against increased insulin sensitivity. But under these new conditions, the saturated fat from eggs and choline are absorbed differently and affect the body in a different way. Actually, not many people know that the color of the shell and the yolk, which is the common question, isn't really an indicator of an egg's nutritional value, because the color of the shell basically depends on the breed of the chicken. For example, white leghorns and red Rhode Islands lay eggs differently, and the color of the shell depends on the breed of the chicken, not on the nutrients inside the egg. So whether you choose white eggs or brown eggs, it really doesn't matter. It's just about the breed of the chicken. But when it comes to orange yolks, people say they're healthier. Although actually, sometimes eggs with pale yolks can be healthy too. But the color only tells you that the chicken was fed a diet rich in carotenoids, especially vitamin B3. And usually that kind of feed contains a lot of marigold petals or a lot of corn. That's why the eggs end up with a more yellow yolk. And out of habit, we tend to think they're probably healthier since they're brighter. But the nutritional value in terms of protein and fat is almost identical. But overall, it should be said that eggs are basically the gold standard for bioavailable protein. In other words, egg protein has the perfect amino acid profile and is absorbed by the body at 97 to 98%. Basically, it serves as the gold standard. Every other type of protein, and protein supplements in particular, are compared to egg protein. And the numbers for eggs are actually even better than those for meat protein or even whey protein. And one large egg gives us, on average, 6 to 7 grams of high-quality protein. But in reality, from a nutrition standpoint, eggs are one of the most controversial foods. Because on one hand, they have high-quality protein, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin B12, more vitamin B3 in the yolks, antioxidants, lutein, and zeaxanthin. By the way, that's really good for your eyes. But on the other hand, there's the yolk. And the yolk, that's cholesterol and, well, choline. And for a long time, it was believed that this was extremely harmful. But modern research shows that, in general, the dietary cholesterol we consume doesn't necessarily have a strong effect on blood cholesterol levels. And in 70% of people, dietary cholesterol hardly affects blood cholesterol levels at all. It's interesting, but it's true. Modern research shows that for most people, it's actually the saturated fats and trans fats from the foods we eat with eggs, like, for example, an English breakfast, bacon, sausage, butter, along with eggs. These other trans fats and saturated fats have a greater impact on the level of bad cholesterol from low-density lipoproteins than the cholesterol from egg yolks themselves. But there are 30% of people, so-called hyperresponders, who react very strongly to dietary cholesterol. And for them, their cholesterol levels skyrocket from eating eggs. But fortunately, this can be checked. But let's add to that. Besides, eggs are one of the best sources of choline, and choline is catastrophically lacking in the modern diet. One egg yolk contains about 150 milligrams of choline, which covers a third of the daily requirement. At the same time, choline is extremely important for brain health because acetylcholine is synthesized from it there. That's the neurotransmitter, the substance responsible for memory. Choline is also important for the liver because it prevents the development of fatty liver disease, the very condition that affects nearly 40% of the population. Choline is also important for the proper development of the neural tube in a fetus during pregnancy. That's why choline and vitamin B9, folic acid, the vitamin for pregnant women, are added. So choline deficiency is a common problem, and eggs can help solve it pretty quickly. Also, a lot of people don't know this, but when a chicken lays an egg, that egg is covered with an almost invisible protein lipid film. Not the membrane inside the egg, but the film on the outside. This film prevents bacteria from getting inside the egg through the pores in the shell. But if you wash an egg with hot water, that slimy coating you feel is actually that very same invisible protein lipid film. It gets washed away, which is why it's really important to wash eggs right before cooking, not ahead of time, and store them in a closed container in the fridge. That way, the eggs are protected from microbes, including salmonella. Well, there's also some data regarding eggs and diabetes. Now, that data is actually contradictory. Many studies show that eating eggs frequently, 2 a day, is associated with a higher risk of type 2 diabetes. But at the same time, other studies show that if you eat 2 eggs a day on a low-carb diet, eggs actually improve insulin sensitivity. So what matters more isn't how many eggs you eat, but how many carbs and sweets you have along with them. That's why, depending on the amount of carbs, if you eat a lot of carbs, eggs might not be so great and could increase your risk of diabetes. The first part of the recommendations is as follows. For most healthy people, 1 or 2 eggs a day is the safe and nutritious part of a proper balanced diet. But the key is how you prepare them. And ideally, of course, you should boil them soft or hard, poach them, or make an omelet, rather than frying them in oil, especially not in butter, or frying them with bacon. But for post-menopausal women, it's best to practice moderation and cut the number of eggs in half. So about half a dozen per week, 3 to 5 eggs. And always pair them with vegetables and whole grains. And absolutely never with meat or white bread. And of course, you should keep an eye on your weight and waist circumference if you eat more eggs. But the at-risk group includes people who already have type 2 diabetes, or those who already have heart problems, or increased sensitivity to cholesterol, that is, those whose cholesterol levels fluctuate or are already high. And for them, it's especially important not to exceed 3, 4, or at most 5 yolks per week. But at the same time, they can add extra egg whites. In the end, eggs aren't simply good or bad. It's important to understand that they're a concentrated source of nutrients, but the effect they have depends on what we eat them with. If you combine them with other fats or sugar, that's harmful. If you eat them with vegetables, then they're beneficial. But the journal Clinical Nutrition conducted studies, including one on women, with 4,500 participants. They observed them for 9 years, tracking all changes in their diet and how it affected their weight. And it turned out that if post-menopausal women eat 2 more eggs per week, they gain about 700 grams to a kilogram more than those who reduce their egg consumption. This is a very important point. So if a woman has reached a certain age, maybe it's better to cut out 2 eggs a week rather than add them. Although it depends on how you look at it. But overall, we now understand that this connection only matters for those who follow a Western-style diet, eating a lot of meat, a lot of fried foods, and a lot of sweets. And for those who eat little of these foods, limit their meat intake to once or twice a week, fry less, boil or bake more, and don't eat a lot of sweets, eggs actually become beneficial for them. But genetic predisposition, as abstract as that may sound right now, plays a big role. But there's good news. Today, we can actually determine genetic predisposition and don't have to just chalk everything up to some vague, it's all genetics explanation. So we can know for sure for whom eggs will be beneficial and for whom they might be harmful. But weight gain itself is primarily linked to cholesterol and choline, which are found in the yolk. So are eggs really the enemy when it comes to cholesterol or not? Modern research shows that context is what really matters. If, along with eggs, we also eat a lot of saturated fats in our diet, then that's harmful. But if we don't eat much saturated fat, then even the cholesterol from eggs is generally fine and doesn't have much of an impact. So 2 eggs a day is perfectly fine. But that's in combination with a diet that's low in saturated fats. And in that case, it can even lower your bad cholesterol compared to a diet that includes both eggs and is high in saturated fats. But the recommendation for healthy people from the Mayo Clinic, a leading organization, is up to 10 eggs a week. For postmenopausal women, and this is based on new research, you need to take individual characteristics and genetics into account and possibly cut the recommended amount in half, that is 5 eggs a week. But still, we should remember that while eggs can be high in cholesterol, the lion's share of their beneficial nutrients comes from vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, B12, choline, which is essential for the brain, as well as lutein and zeaxanthin, which are good for your eyesight. So there's no need to give up eggs completely. Although there used to be concerns that choline from eggs could be converted by gut bacteria into a potentially harmful substance, trimethylamine N-oxide, but this depends on the state of your gut microbiome. So if your gut microbiome is in bad shape, it might be better to hold off on eggs or limit yourself to half a dozen, that is 5 eggs a week. But if your gut microbiome is healthy, then eating 2 eggs a day doesn't raise TMAO, trimethylamine N-oxide levels, and it definitely doesn't change your gut microbiome in the short term, and most likely not in the long term either. However, if we combine eggs with other foods, that's when the gut microbiome can get disrupted and eggs can become harmful. So the practical takeaways are, first of all, context is everything. For example, for a woman in menopause, a couple of eggs for breakfast with avocado and whole grain toast is healthy, but those same eggs with bacon, potatoes, and a sweet pastry are unhealthy. So we eat eggs as part of a balanced diet with vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. And we keep an eye on our total calorie intake. Because metabolism doesn't actually slow down with age, but we slow down. We start moving less. That's why adding physical activity allows us to adapt to a regular diet with normal calories without having to cut back. Next, consider the way you prepare them, because boiled, poached, and omelet-style eggs are preferable to those fried in oil, especially butter. Take your individual needs into account. If you have thyroid issues or tend to gain weight quickly, it might be better to hold off on eggs for a while. And of course, don't pair them with processed foods. But overall, a single egg is only about 70 to 80 calories. So even if we increase our egg consumption, it's unlikely we'll go overboard on calories. The way you prepare them is definitely much more important. but the feeling of fullness eggs provide helps us eat less of other foods. And that, of course, is a win for us in every way. Well, genetics definitely matter, and we know that different people can metabolize foods differently. The PNPLA3 gene is responsible for fat accumulation, and it's also very important for egg metabolism. There are people whose PNPLA3 gene is defective, and in that case, they can even gain extra weight just from eating eggs. And those people whose PNPLA3 gene is fine, the third type, they can eat lots of eggs and not gain weight. So if you really want to get into it, you can, of course, check your genetics, get a genetic test, and figure out how many eggs you can eat. But overall, eggs themselves aren't dangerous. What's important is the right context and combining them with the right foods. I'm really curious, how do you feel about eggs? How many eggs do you eat? Write it right in the comments. Do you eat 10 eggs a week, or maybe 2 eggs a week, or even 50? And how do you feel? Have you noticed if you gain weight from eating eggs or not? Or maybe you eat eggs without the yolks. And how's your cholesterol? Please write in the comments. And while you're at it, suggest some topics that would be useful for you in the next video. I'd be happy to make a video about that. And by the way, be sure to share this video with your friends who love eggs. Let them know what to pair eggs with to make them healthy, and what not to combine them with so they don't harm their health. And with that, we'll say goodbye for now. See you again soon. Bye-bye.